I'm here with Ted Hope, producer on over 70 films, studio exec on over 60. You launched Amazon's foray into feature films. You, of course, run Hope for Film and have really initiated the NonDē movement in many ways. Uh, and you have very graciously come to talk to me about Utopia, which is quite a topic. I guess I should say that I chose this topic. Well, we went back and forth, and you kind of nudged me to choose this, and I chose it because you write about Utopia a lot. It's something that is hard to define since it's both philosophical, religious, practical. It's been defined in many ways in history, and it's something that I think is important for to unite people. Anyway, I will set the timer, and you have described Utopia as a sustainable and generative creative life in film. Um, what what is Utopia in in the film ecosystem?
Yeah, I'd take it back a step of a kind of practical approach. A pragmatic approach is knowing what you want, right?
Yeah,
And that's actually quite hard. I think we diminish that and we settle on things that aren't really fully even aligned with what we want, right?
yeah,
And I find that through my collaborative relationships with people, that their goals are often very short term, right? And so they run into, having been able to last as long as I've had and had the opportunities that I've had, I get to see people at many stages of their career. And I think that short-term thinking that besieges all of us is one of the reasons that there's much unhappiness and dissatisfaction, right?
yeah,
And so I started, trying to figure out how to address that. And there are concepts that I've embraced along the way. One of them really helped, the articulation which Vanessa, my wife, and often collaborator, helped me with, which is this phrasing of the system we are in and the system within us, right?
yeah,
Now, I was always a kind of systems oriented thinker for a variety of reasons, some of it coming from doing community organizing even before I got into film, right? And, trying to figure out like how do you actually make change? How do you lead change?
right.
And and from that, what once I started recognizing that people's short-term goals were not improving the system or leading to their satisfaction, I started trying to look further, right? And that led to like, what is it that you really want? And that articulation of a sustainable and generative creative practice or ecosystem that rewards a sustainable and generative creative practice, particularly centered on the cinema that we individually and collectively might love most, which for me is a very specific type of film, right? Which comes and goes in terms of preferences, I think, by the industry, which I refer to as ambitiously authored,
Yeah,
right? How to make that a permanent place, particularly I think it is in the European and Asian and
yeah,
Latin American systems, but not in the American system, for a variety of reasons. But to try to establish it became a goal. And, really it's not the final step to me, but it is the practical, step. Um, that most people want to know that they have a safe career,
yeah,
and they want to know that it has an arc where the work presumably gets better. You know, I think people like that idea. It's a little counter, a lot of people feel like, well, everyone's got three stories to tell, and the majority of folks probably shouldn't tell more than those three stories.
Yeah.
There are definitely folks who feel that, I think. But how that question of how do we improve our work, you know, is connected to you have to know you have a long-term future,
Yeah.
and you really have to be able to get stuff done, get stuff made. Generative doesn't mean just making features, it's being creative. So to me, like that's the first achievable part. But utopian thinking, utopian ideation for the film business doesn't stop with the film business. You need the requirement of a much bigger picture. That question of, you know, how, unless we dream of a better world, how will we ever, know how to get there? Right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's important that you brought up European, Asian, Latin American markets, because these are cultures that teach philosophy. They teach dreaming, long-term thinking. It's like embedded in their school systems. That we don't do that here in America. So I think just the idea of approaching utopia as a concept is probably quite foreign to Americans because we don't grow up with it. Um, so I guess on one hand, I don't know if you would agree with this, but for me, like a utopia in this regard is maybe as simple as just an artist can have a career doing their art. That doesn't seem too far-fetched, at least when we apply it to film. But it seems like that's really unapproachable um, right now in the film business. So I
It's
guess,
designed to be. It's actually designed to be. Like I think we start thinking like, oh, we have this problem. Why is it so hard? But you can look at the American system, and I should have added, also, Middle East, the
yes,
MENA countries, and
yeah,
Africa, and all of that, because again, their cinema cultures are actually, I think, far more ambitious than what the American cinema culture is. And I think you're right, but it starts with this um hierarchy of putting somebody on top, right? Believing that there's such a thing as better than or Platonian form,
yeah,
which is a manner of thinking that is drilled into us and creates things like male supremacy and racial hatred, right? That type of hierarchical ranking that we put into everything is a means of control, which allows us to distance ourselves from our collaborators, from our fellow participants, thinking as long as we've got ours, it's enough, right? And the main reason we don't have a vibrant creative class in America, right? And I say that saying, up until a while ago, our number one or two export after the military industrial complex was the industrial entertainment complex, right? We once knew how to delight people better than anybody else, right? But I would still say we actively suppress the creative class in America by denying the really basic things, right? You go anywhere else. Why is it so much cheaper to make a movie in Europe? Because they actually supply healthcare and education, better, mass transportation, right? That they've invested in renewable energies, like all of these things, and they work harder to police to get the hatred and the hierarchies out of their systems. These are all things that prevent us from being creative, from being artists, right? Like if we had free education, if we weren't burdened by student loans, more people could actually believe that this was something that they could do. And it's good business. Like the people address it from a business standpoint, right? It feels like politics when you start talking about it, but it's basic life. It is basic life that I, for one, believe like that's why we should live in society because we can actually cooperate and work together and cover our needs better so that we individually can decide what we want to pursue better, right? But we don't do that here.
I yeah I like in trying to think of like what can we do? I feel like looking at universal healthcare is quite overwhelming. Trying to look at like how European theatrical releases are protected for months on end. I don't, maybe I'm pessimistic, but I don't see that as like an achievable goal in the short term. What
I'm sorry, but I profoundly disagree.
I'd like to hear that, but I see that I find a more achievable short-term goals. And it is kind of in looking at like basically approaching it as a like from a business standpoint. I think there is a huge demand for new voices in cinema. And if if we were to cater to that demand, there are ways that we can navigate the infrastructure until these bigger political things are addressed that I think are more of an uphill battle.
Okay, here's why we need utopian thinking.
Yeah.
I would say only 5% or so of the active cinema goers actually choose what they watch, right? That we're not, it's the same thing. We don't know we have a choice until we know what that choice exists, right?
Yeah.
So 100%, whatever your taste, right? I can guarantee that the movies that will most satisfy you have already been made. And you should disregard all new cinema because better work exists in the past, right? There's only one reason to watch new work, right? And that's cultural relevancy. Things change, right? Godard, Kurosawa, they're dead, right? They can't make a movie about today. They can be prescient, right, along the way, but they can't really, you can make a movie about today,
Yeah.
right? Now, your work is going to get better studying those masters, so to speak, not the greatest word, but studying the people that learned quite a few things along the way to it. The system, the business system that we've built, the one that currently exists, that is dominated by the global streaming platforms, is predicated on creating that feeling you mentioned earlier of being overwhelmed, right? A
Yeah.
world of abundance, right? Where we just need to quick make a decision, be decisive, click on that thing, right? And the best way that the business works to get people to make business is to have everybody watch the same thing, right? And so there's a whole set of mechanisms, right, that are set up to make us engage, to be distracted from our actual wants and desires, right? To actually move towards the thing that you want, right? You have to understand what that is, right? And you have to be intentional in your actions along consumption, right? And most people, I know I struggle with it, and I can tell you I've worked really hard to do that. And I know I've shared this many times. There are more movies that I've identified that I want to watch that I will ever get to, even if I was able to maintain my maximum rate of consumption. I will die based on my lifetime expectancy rate, before I complete that cycle. And 100%, those movies from the past will delight me more, right? But I still feel the urge to engage in the conversation that everyone is having around the new thing that's there because I like being part of this world that is happening right now. I don't need to live in the past, right? But all of that, right? To get closer to satisfaction, we have to start to identify what we want. That when I coach somebody about like how to develop that sustainable and generative creative practice,
Yeah.
one of the first things that it's not the first, but one in those top 5 things that we do is to start work on something I call the roadmap to utopia, right? Which wants to be comprehensive. It wants to address everything that you think would be better in this world? It's about a 5 year activity, right?
Yeah.
To do it. It brought me a level of peace along the way. My son, when he saw it and I showed it to him and tried to coach him, he's an artist, tried to encourage him to pursue it. He said, "What? Are you running for president or something? Why do you need this?" Right? But I find that by having it, it actually diminishes that feeling of being overwhelmed about all of these things that are out of control. And at the same time, it sparks 100 ideas. Many flowers bloom because I start to see that both the interconnectedness of things and the value of things in a slightly different way. And that deepens the amount of things that I find interesting, the reasons I find them interesting, and how I can communicate those aspects of them in my creative work, right? So I'm a big believer that we've been misled all along in that we don't want the simple is better sort of thing, right? Simple is better, yes, for a consumption speed to get us to consume those things first. Give me the 40-year-old virgin title that allows me to understand exactly what the movie is, and I'm going to click on it, right? It's the
Yeah.
same reason we use put movie stars on their face. We think we want, we once thought we wanted that, right? On the thumbnail, rather. Um, but the the better movie, in my opinion, what I love, not everybody else, but I think it's again a question more of conditioning than anything else, is one that is complex
Yeah.
and filled with secret languages. Those things that we can't decipher, but we still know they're for us, that we connect with and we see. They're wormholes. They're things that we can ponder off that not necessarily even ever get tied up in the script, but we find fascinating. We relate to them. We feel them speaking to us, hearing us, recognizing us along the way. And I think the more that we dream big, the more we dream for that better world, the more we do utopian ideation, the more that we bring those things in. And big result, we get better at moving to that. We start to develop pattern recognition to
Yeah.
those things that we seek and we respond, ultimately love along the way, as well as the people that feel similarly, that we are aligned with and can better collaborate with, and how to get there faster. So we start to understand, how do we engineer serendipity? How do we actually stumble upon those happy accidents?
Yeah.
We become the thing that helps us. I'm not a big fan of this word, but manifest those things that we want, that we think are utopian.
I
It
think
lifts all of it up.
engineering serendipity is quite a great phrase. But I'll point out like we've definitely, there's no shortage in literature. We've been through this before in terms of like having too much to consume in other mediums. So it's nothing new to have this over abundance of the ability to consume nonstop of something. Uh, I
Uh,
I agree that complexity is part of the key of like um, what we need. And I think part of it is conditioning or acquiring taste, and that people, if they're exposed to more complex films, that they will seek them out and become more comfortable with them. So since in our last 2 minutes, like it is, are you saying like the I guess I'm trying to like wrestle with like how much of this is dreaming and making sure we're all philosophically aligned, and how much of this is like a roadmap that is like that we should be following and yeah. Does that make sense?
It's all process, right? And we have to recognize we are all becoming, right? Works in progress. That's us, right? And but I think the initial step is how to unlock the dream, right? And as we get better at defining the what is, more flowers bloom. That dream becomes more complex. We see more aspects. But when we start to capture that, and again, that's why I say it's not a short term process, it's 5 years or longer in a life, and that's always being worked on, right? We actually get practical about it, right? And we can see the results, right? that the part of the problem that we live, particularly in America, but in this present time, right, that most of our quote goals got locked into monetary rewards and status elements along the way, right? Which are you're never going to be satisfied with, right? Along the way, having things that matter to you, the establishment of your values, and a flexibility so those also alter and morph and exchange and as they go along, and your ability to move on the path towards those values can give you much more satisfaction. And that satisfaction is key to your ability for it to have persistence and resilience in a cruel, bitter, solitary world, right? That you start to break through that because you start to see how we are actually more aligned with others, right? So just the thought of utopian ideation brings you closer to that utopia, and we can rejoice in that and be more satisfied along the way. It's a flywheel effect.
That is our time. I think that is a very succinct way to put it. One last like little thought is, are we in dystopia right now?
No, and I think it's actually really wrong for us to think of that, and it's totally taken over in most of our imagination, right? Like I always loved the story that I was told that in the 50s into the 60s, when Americans closed their eyes, the majority of us saw a mushroom cloud. They saw a detonation.
Yeah.
And when we launched the moonshot and we had this photograph of the big blue marble, and we saw that we were just this one thing all together in a vast amount of space, we actually became more hopeful, right? We
Yeah.
shifted our imagination, to that. There are reasons we sell dystopian imagery, right? You go into a Abercrombie and Finch store and they play music that you won't like because it's going to make you buy things more. Capitalism thrives the more dissatisfied we are. We will seek out material satisfaction instead of cooperation along the way, right? And it's not an accident that people drive that dystopian vision, right?
Yeah.
I believe, like, before you get to your roadmap to utopia, right, you want to work on a book of love, all the things that you love and warm you. And you want to spot those on your morning walks, on your afternoon drives, in your evening, contemplation. Like there is so much wonder to be beheld, right? And we only can speak of the negative. I'm guilty of it tenfold, but I spend a lot of time in my own head thinking about the things I love and admire.
Yeah. Um, I think that
We are in a positive world, and the whole thing about NonDē and film stack, right, is it's a positive ideation. It is saying, fuck it. I'm tired of saying it's all broken. I'm tired to say it's all won't work, right? I know I can make things, and I know there's someone somewhere that's going to respond to this work. And damn it, if I'm not going to get it done and connect with that person.
yeah. Well, that will be a nice segue into our next conversation, which we
I
will.
look forward to it, Avi.
Yeah, me too. Well, thank you, Ted.